Life is unpredictable, and it's estimated that 90% of us will experience at least one tragic event during the course of our lives. Resilience in the physical sense is a material's ability to resume its original shape after being bent or stretched. For people, resilience is the ability to bounce back and get on with life in the face of adversity. However, while bouncing back, people are often transformed or affected by the event. Adversity can either make you or break you. How you adapt in the face of adversity and weather the storm is what makes all the difference. I'd like to share a few personal stories that I think you might find helpful as you journey through life and encounter the inevitable storm. At the age of 14, I dove into shallow water performing this rescue dive as part of a life-saving course at Boy Scout summer camp. And instantly, when I hit the bottom of the lake, I was immediately paralyzed from the neck down. I couldn't move or feel anything. I floated from the bottom of the lake to the surface, face down, and was quickly running out of air. Just before I inhaled, my lungs filled with water, my instructor rolled me immediately on my back and saved my life. Over the next several months, weeks actually, I had several surgeries on my neck to remove bone from my spinal cord and to have my cervical spine reconstructed. I spent a month in the intensive care unit, connected to life-saving machines, and I had to rely on everybody around me to do just about everything. Once my condition stabilized, the plan was for me to go to a rehabilitation hospital with the hopes that I would start to get some movement back, and when my movement started to come back, I would exercise really, really hard to get up and walk again. So when I arrived at the rehabilitation hospital, my new doctor came into the room, and he wanted to give me some straight talk. And he said point blank to me, Jim, you're never going to walk again, you're never going to move your hands again, you'll probably never have children, and you're going to have to focus on things in high school that will prepare you for a job that a quadriplegic can do. So that was devastating. If you just stop and imagine that for a moment, how you would have felt. I was between 9th and 10th grade, around 15 years old. I was physically active, I loved the outdoors. I was looking forward to going back to 10th grade with my friends, to take new classes, drive a car, start dating, all of this over in just a split second. I was actually overwhelmed by the situation, and the only way that I knew how to adapt to this was to become angry and bitter. My doctor became public enemy number one, and I absolutely refused to go to any therapies that had to do with me learning how to live my life as a quadriplegic, to use different devices and utensils in order to eat, or even get into a motorized wheelchair to get around. I absolutely refused, because in my mind, that meant that I was accepting my disability and giving up on my dream to walk. So I just laid back and I said, I'm going to wait for my body to start moving again. I would exercise, and that worked for a couple of weeks. I started to get the movement in my shoulders and my wrists, but then after a short time, it stopped. My anger and bitterness turned to despair. And this is when I turned very seriously to my faith and to prayer. And in doing this, I was asking to find some meaning in what this was all about, some purpose in my life, and some hope to go forward. And over time, through my prayer and through faith, I was able to, I had a change of heart. I had a different attitude about what was going on. First, I became more grateful for the situation that I was in. I thought to myself, I could have drowned that day, I could have died, I almost did. I was grateful for the fact that I was still able to read. I was able to think, I was able to talk, I was able to communicate with my friends. Instead of being angry about my spinal cord injury, I went off to the hospital library and pulled out books on the central nervous system. I read about nerve regeneration, and I said, you know what? I'm going to be on the forefront of the research. Maybe I'll find a cure for spinal cord injury one day. Maybe I'll end up being a physician one day too. It became my new hobby. Another thing that happened through my prayer is I began to have I reframed my situation in a positive light. I developed better coping mechanisms. And I thought to myself, just as someone who uses a crutch to get around when they have a cast on the leg with a broken leg, I was going to think of my wheelchair as a crutch or something temporary until I can get up and move around again, until there was a cure for paralysis. So with that, I continue to, in the meantime, I'm going to just continue living my life and using my skills and my talents to the best of my abilities to move forward. I have to say that research on faith and spirituality have showed to be very powerful resilient factors in prisoners of war and victims of unimaginable trauma. And honestly, as a physician and a scientist, I have to say that without that, I would have never been able to make it through this part of my life the way that I did. So I was bouncing back, and I jumped in the wheelchair, and I was ready to drive it. I was zipping up and down the hallways, learning how to drive, getting to therapy on time. I learned how to use all these devices and splints that I refused to use in the past. Learned how to brush my hair right with a special splint. I even learned how to shave. There was a little bit of blood involved with that, but I think I got pretty good at it. I was bouncing back from spinal cord injury and getting back into life. At the same time, my life was very different, with different meaning and different interests. So after being in the hospital for an entire year after my accident, I went back home and I took some time learning how to maneuver my chair around the house, building up stamina so I could stay in the wheelchair for a long time. And I was tutored for 11th and 12th grade. My teachers would come in, give me my assignments, and when I was finished, I really had a lot of time on my hands. And that's when I really delved into my new hobby, which was the spinal cord and learning about the human body. I remember the one time I had a fever of 103, I had a terrible infection, and I was freezing cold. I felt like I was outside in the sub-zero weather, and my temperature was going up and up and up, and I couldn't understand this disconnect. So I asked my nurse to go to the hospital, bring back books from the library, and I stumbled upon the hypothalamus. And I read about how the hypothalamus controls body temperature and how it can vasodilate your vessels and constrict your vessels in your skin in order to regulate temperature. And that when you have bacteria in your blood, your temperature will go up because your immune system works better that way. And I started to understand the physiology behind all the things that I was feeling, and it just blew my mind. I said, I'm going to be a physician. And when it was time for me to go for a major, I was going to go pre-med. It was a no-brainer. I wanted to combine my experiences as a patient with my love for medicine and dedicate my life to taking care of patients. It was now time for me to get on the other side of the stethoscope and pursue my dream. I felt very, very accomplished and very proud of myself. I came up with a system where I recorded lectures, borrowed notes from friends, and I used adaptive devices in the laboratories in order to get my work done. I applied to medical school with a 3.92 GPA. I had excellent MCAT scores, and I had research experience. I was very optimistic I was going to get in, and I didn't have any doubts. So when I received letters of invitations to come for interviews, I just expected it. What actually happened during those interviews was a completely different story and a brand new storm that was forming in my life. I'll just give you an example of 2 interviews so you get a sense of what happened. In my first interview in Philadelphia, I sat down and the professor was interviewing me, and he was very happy about the work that I did and impressed that I was able to make it through as far as I did. He said, but medical students have to draw blood, suture wounds, and deliver babies. How are you going to do that? I was well prepared for that question. I said, listen, I have realistic expectations, and I understand my limitations. But I'm not planning to be an emergency room doctor, a surgeon, or an obstetrician. I'm thinking more about becoming a psychiatrist, a radiologist, or a subspecialist in medicine, a type of physician that uses their cerebral abilities more than their physical dexterity. He stopped for a moment and thought, and then he extended his hand to shake my hand, and he said, good luck. 2 weeks later, I received my first rejection letter from medical school. I wasn't that upset, because I think it went pretty well, and I said still many other interviews to go on. So my second interview, I went in, it was again in Philadelphia, being interviewed by a neurologist. And when I came into the room, the neurologist looked at my hands, and he said, how do you think you're going to be a doctor with paralyzed hands? Again, I answered very respectfully. I said, well, there are doctors who use physician's assistants in their offices, and I really plan on going into an area of medicine that's more cerebral. And he said, stop right there. When you leave here today, I want you to go to the School of Performing Arts and tell them that you want to become a concert pianist. Listen carefully to what they say, because I feel the same way about you becoming a physician. That was a knockout level punch, a Category 5 life storm. I started thinking to myself, did all the medical schools really think the same about me? Was I absolutely crazy or naive trying to take on the medical school establishment? This made me think of the straight talk doc when he told me, you're never going to walk, you're never going to use your hands, you're never going to have children, you're going to have to do a job that the quadriplegic does. But this time, I wasn't overwhelmed. This time, I wasn't going to run underground and hide, just waiting for the storm to pass. Instead, I adapted. And I adapted, my eyes opened up, and I saw the true reality of the situation that I was in. I realized that I wasn't going to get into medical school that easy, and I was going to have to work a lot harder than I was. Simply applying over and over again wasn't going to do the job, and I was going to have to work a lot harder. So, was I scared? Absolutely. Was I fearful? You bet. But this time I had courage. Courage doesn't mean not having fear. It means having the ability to deal with your fear and continue to move forward. If this doc thought that he scared me out of going to medical school, he did just the opposite. He made me a more motivated, dedicated, and prepared medical student. Over time, I received 10 rejection letters from all the medical schools, and I had to make a very difficult decision. And the difficult decision for me was whether or not to take my story to the media. Because taking the story to the media had some risk associated with it. And that is that the medical schools just might see me as an agitator, or just merely an activist, not with intentions to go to medical school, but just to cause trouble. And if that happened, I'd be blacklisted and never get in. So the way I thought about that was, anything worthwhile is associated with risk. And I was willing to put it all on the line, because this dream to become a physician and my love for it was so rooted deeply in my heart, it was worth putting it on the line. So I did an interview with a small town newspaper. The next day I woke up, front page news, quadriplegic denied admission to medical school, honor grad. The day after that, my story was picked up by the Associated Press, and it went over 200 newspapers throughout the country. I received interviews, my answering machine filled up with interviews from NBC News, ABC News, CBS, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, and radio talk shows from all over the country. Through the media, I was called by Senator Ray Musto, who was a Pennsylvania senator, and he explained to me that the Pennsylvania Fair Educational Opportunities Act prohibits discrimination in public schools based on race, religion, color, and national origin. He said that he was going to add to that disability, put it up for a vote called the Jimmy Post bill. I was so excited they were naming a bill after me. Believe it or not, the medical schools, when they found out that this legislation was coming through, they actually hired lobbyists to block it from going through. Regardless, the legislation passed, making it illegal for any state-funded school to deny admission based on a physical disability. I applied a second time, and the rejection letters started coming in faster than before. And this time, without even an interview. And I finally got a break. The clock was clicking down, I finally got a break. I was invited to do a talk show in New York City, a national show, and in the audience that day, I was going to debate a dean from one of the Pennsylvania medical schools to defend myself as to why I should go to medical school. And in the audience that day was a neurologist from the Albert Einstein College of Medicine who had polio as a child and was left with some mobility problems, and he actually made it through medical school. And he said to the talk show host at the end that he didn't think that there was any reason why I couldn't become a physician, that in his medical school, doctors are trained to use a vast knowledge of the human body to interpret complex patient data to make differential diagnosis and treatment plans. He said he could definitely become a specialist. The talk show host then said, well, will you take him at your medical school? And he said, he'll have to apply first. So right after that, we took off, went home, I stayed up late, filled out the application, and sent it in. I interviewed at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine, and I finally received an acceptance letter to go. When all the celebrations and the parties were over, I thought back for a while in retrospect just to think about how my accident, my spinal cord injury, reoriented my entire life and gave it new meaning and purpose. I was struck by the notion that if I left camp that day with just a certificate in life-saving, I probably would have never saved an entire life, and I had the opportunity to save a life, ever. Even the battle to get into medical school gave me the opportunity to find a medical school that was a perfect fit for me. And also along the way, I was able to knock down some barriers and pave a path for other disabled applicants that would come behind me. Adversity can present itself in a number of different ways. It could be having lack of self-confidence. It could be high anxiety level in any certain situation. It may be not having that exact GPA that you need to get into the college of your dreams, or making a mistake in the middle of a recital that you practice months and months for in order to perfect. Whatever it may be, I'd like to leave you with 3 essential elements that I think will help you adapt and grow stronger through just about any adversity. And that is number 1, try framing your situation in a positive light. And you can do that by searching for purpose and meaning in your adversity. Adversity will often help you discover things about yourself that you never knew, and opportunities that you never knew existed. Frame your situation as something temporary, not a permanent condition. Second, have gratitude through your adversity. It's very easy to get caught up in the negativity of adversity, comparing yourself to other people, focusing on what you don't have. Self-pity creates envy, and envy has the power to destroy just about any of your dreams. Be thankful for the gifts that you have, the talents that you have. Align them with your goals, and that's the formula for success. And finally, number 3, face adversity boldly. Adversity unleashes the power of the human spirit, which is that little voice inside that keeps saying, yes, you can. Every time everyone around you keeps saying, no, you can't. It builds strength, it builds grit, it builds fortitude. And with that comes resilience, which is the ability to bounce back in life every time it knocks you down. I'd like to close with a quote from C.S. Lewis that I think explains adversity perfectly, and that is, adversity often prepares ordinary people for extraordinary destiny. Thank you.